We'll call this meeting of the Camarillo Sanitary District Board of Directors to order and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Director Tremblay.
Here.
Director Santangelo.
Here.
Director Molche.
Present.
Secretary Kildee.
Here.
Chair Craven.
Here. Okay, all members are present. Please rise and join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any amendments to the agenda?
No amendments to the agenda.
Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak to us on an item that is not on the agenda or is on the agenda?
No, there are no members of the public.
Okay, that gets us to the consent calendar.
Move consent.
Madam Chair,
I have some questions, but
I have a question as well. if you
Mr.
would.
Kildee.
I don't want item C pulled necessarily, but I do have a question on that. Would it be appropriate to ask the question at this time?
Right now,
Maybe staff can answer that. If we're going to rescind this, I just want to make sure that not only are we entering fire season, we're pretty much in the fire season. I just want to make sure that the diesel tank, fuel tank is working properly, and whether or not we have enough time to go out again for a bit. I just want to make sure that the maintenance will still be in place. That's all I had. Yeah.
Mr. Klotzel.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Council, Board of Directors. Yes, this item actually, we need to rescind so that we can go out and rebid right away. And what we are doing is amending the prior agreement actually with our existing contractor to continue the maintenance that's needed in the next few months. So maintenance will be occurring, and then we will rebid and have a new maintenance contract in place in time for the next maintenance cycle. So everything's being covered with the necessary maintenance.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have a question on this item? This was the other one. This is the one that I had questions on as well. Who is our current contractor?
It is Mercado, JD Mercado.
It is JD Mercado. Okay. But he doesn't have a license.
Well, it was actually a technicality with the registration with the DIR for the contractor registration requirements. And what happened is that registration lapsed and wasn't in place at the time of submittal of bid and award of the contract. So that's technically they need to be registered, which they since have been.
Okay.
So that's all cleared and ready to go. Unfortunately, we just need to go through these technicality steps of rebidding. And so that with his new, or with any bidder's requirement to have the registration in place for the next round of bidding.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions? We have a motion by Mr. Tremblay. I didn't hear a second. Was there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Mrs. Santangelo will second. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Tremblay.
Yes.
Director Santangelo.
Yes.
Director Molche.
Yes.
Secretary Kildee.
Yes.
Chair Craven.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Are there any comments from staff?
No comments from staff.
Comments from board members? I do want to announce that the CASA conference that was scheduled for January in Indian Wells has been changed to be another virtual conference. And so you can mark your calendars accordingly. Their next real conference, I guess the virtual conference is a real conference, but their next in-person conference is scheduled for, I think it's the third week of August next year in San Diego. With no other business to conduct, I will adjourn this meeting.
All right, we'll go ahead and call this meeting, special meeting of the Camarillo Successor Agency for Wednesday, October 28 to order. Let the record reflect that all directors are here. Are there any amendments to the agenda?
No amendments.
All right, are there any public comments?
No public comments.
Seeing no public comments, let's move to the consent calendar. Do we have a motion?
I'll move the approval.
I think Ms. Santangelo won that race.
Okay, I'll second it.
Motion by Ms. Santangelo, second by Mr. Kildee. Secretary, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Craven,
Yes.
Councilmember Kildee,
Yes.
Councilmember Molche,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Santangelo,
Yes.
Mayor Tremblay.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Are there any comments from staff? Hearing
No
none.
comments from staff.
And any comments from board members? All right, hearing none, we're going to go ahead then and adjourn that meeting of the Camarillo Successor Agency. And we will go ahead and call the regular meeting of the City Council for Wednesday, October 28, 2020 to order. I'll let the record reflect that all council members are present. Are there any amendments to the agenda?
No amendments.
Hearing none. By the way, members of the council, what we're going to do, since we have no items other than public comment on the 7:30 agenda, my intention is to go ahead and we'll work through this 5 o'clock docket or 5 o'clock calendar, excuse me, and perhaps take a break around 6:45 or so and take a break for dinner and then come back at 7:30. We would finish on the 7:30 calendar anything we have not gotten to on this 5 o'clock calendar. Are there any objections to approaching it that way? All right, hearing none, we're going to go to presentations. And Ms. Nichols, would you please lead us off?
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council members. As you know, the pandemic has forced the postponement and cancellation of many community activities and events, including the annual Christmas parade. That's one of our impacted events. With the anticipation that the parade could continue, the City Council maintained funding in the current budget. Under current state guidelines, however, and the restrictions, the parade cannot be conducted in its traditional way. And the Pleasant Valley Recreation and Park District staff has developed a new concept for this year. Mr. Connor Sudani, Recreation Specialist at the PVRPD, is here to present information on the 2020 Christmas Parade.
Thank you, Carmen. Mayor Tremblay, members of the council, good evening. Thank you for having me here to discuss this with you. Let me see if I can get this all squared away here. All right. So if you'll all turn your attention to the screen, you'll notice my name is Connor Sudani. I'm a recreation specialist with the Pleasant Valley Recreation and Park District. I am the additional event manager for the Camarillo Christmas Parade, as you know it. We are proposing a different version of the parade this year, obviously due to the constraints and restrictions that we're facing here. We're calling it the 2020 Camarillo Christmas Parade, Santa Hits the Road. And I'll go into more detail about what that means. So a little bit of background on the parade in general. It's this, the traditional Camarillo Christmas Parade is held on the second Saturday in December. Typically goes from 10 to 1 in the afternoon with 100+ entries and roughly 50+ vendors in Santa's Village. We usually see somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 attendees between the parade as well as Santa's Village. And from a financial standpoint, the city-district partnership has been vital for the success of this event. In 2018, the city provided us with $20,000 in funding plus in-kind via the Community Events Funding Agreement to offset a total event expense of $53,000. In the 2019 parade, the city also provided $25,000 plus in-kind services to offset a total event expense of $64,000. For 2020, what we're developing, or what we're proposing rather, is the Santa Hits the Road iteration of the Camarillo Christmas Parade, a 7-vehicle convoy visiting neighborhoods in Camarillo over the course of Saturday, December 12th, starting at 8 a.m. and finishing at roughly 6 p.m. We estimate that the total event expenses for this, to include our own staffing, are around $22,000 to be offset by city funding of $10,000. And now we're just going to go into the routes just a little bit, just so you have an idea of what we're talking about from the perspective of neighborhoods that we're planning to come into contact with over the course of this day. So the idea would be that we would have 5 separate routes, this route being the first one, which each council member would partake in individually. So one council member and one of our board members would partake in route 1, and then alternating at route 2, 3, 4, and for number 5 as well. So this one in particular starts at Mel Vincent Park and zigzags its way through some of the Navy housing there, and then works its way up north of Las Posas before finishing down by Constitution Park. And we estimate that's roughly an hour and a half of total commitment for that route. These timeframes are based upon an estimated 5 miles per hour for the convoy. So obviously there's some fluctuation in there, but that is the baseline that we've set for each route. And then with the second route, again, this one is actually going to be heading out from Constitution Park. And again, as I mentioned before, these routes relay off of each other. So they sort of tag one group and then they go to the next one and on and on. So this one goes from Constitution Park, zigzags its way through the Heights a bit and around after going around the community center and finishes at the Camarillo Public Library. And that one's about an hour and 45. Route 3 here would have us going from the Camarillo Public Library, zigzagging through this Dos Caminos area on the, the western, or rather eastern side of Temple there, and then finishing down at the Pleasant Valley Aquatic Center, where we would break for lunch for a bit. And then moving on to Route 4 here. This one would have us starting again at the Pleasant Valley Aquatic Center, picking up right where we left off, making our way through some of the area east of Arneal before heading into the Old Town Camarillo area, making our way through some of the area around Pleasant Valley Fields before finishing up at the Ventura County Office of Education parking lot. And then our last route, which would be Route 5 here. This one would have us doing more of a loop than anything else. This one has us starting, again, picking up right where we left off at the Ventura County Office of Education, circling our way through the Mission Oaks neighborhood and finishing right where we started for the conclusion of this. So with respect to key partners for this, obviously City of Camarillo is a vital part of this event's success, and we are happy to be able to work with you guys again. We have been in touch with the Ventura County Sheriff's Office of Traffic, and they have given us the okay for certain things like the routes, obviously. And then, of course, we've been working with some of our more traditional groups like Music Freaks, who is formerly known as Rock City Studios, to provide us with some musical entertainment throughout the route as well. And then our friend Dave Kromka from the Ventura County Professional Firefighters Association has agreed to drive Santa through the streets in one of his fire trucks that you see pictured there at the bottom of your screen. And then, of course, additional partners are coming soon. So from a budget impact standpoint, again, this just basically gives you a little bit of an outline of what we're looking at as far as revenue and expenses. Obviously, the 10,000 from a community event funding is much appreciated and very, very necessary for us to make this event happen. We are anticipating largely our expenses to come from staffing involvement, from planning, implementation, and of course, evaluation of the event after it's done. These expenses also do not include any in-kind trades for services or advertising, and they don't include the city-provided in-kind services either. And I am happy to answer any questions that you may have to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Mr. Sidoni, for a good presentation and a very creative way to approach this. Do any members of the council have questions for Mr. Sidoni or for Ms. Nichols?
I have a question.
Mr. Kildee.
Yeah. What constitutes the 7 vehicles? Is that including the fire truck, or are those just the vehicles that council members and park district elected officials are going to be in as well?
So the 7 vehicle convoy is, I should first say that we spoke with the traffic department at the Ventura County Sheriff's Office to get an idea of basically the maximum limit of what they were comfortable with. And they said 10 vehicle lengths. And so we based that up. And so what we've done is we've said, okay, that 7 vehicle convoy would then consist of a front and rear escort vehicle of police escorts. So that's 2, a vehicle to transport one of the city council members. That's 3, a vehicle to transport one of our board members, which makes 4. And then of course, Santa Claus in the fire truck, that's 5. And then we haven't had this explicitly outlined yet, but there's a great deal of potential for some high-level sponsors if they want to be involved, and they have contributed in some in-kind way that allows them that we feel is deserving of participation. We do have a couple of slots left for them if it comes to that.
Okay. I have a follow-up, if I may.
Go ahead, Mr. Kildee.
The 8 to 5 time frame, that time of year, it starts getting dark somewhat earlier than that. Was that taken into consideration about the time frame and the length of that?
Yes, sir. So with respect to the time frame itself, we had gone through a number of proposals for this event, but the one that we settled on as a district was one that involved us going through this event over the course of one day and not splitting it up over multiple days. With that in mind, we do think there is a little bit of flexibility with respect to some of our timeframes for the routes. Obviously, as I said, the timeframes are estimated based on an average speed of 5 miles per hour, and while we think that's a good place, while we think that's a good baseline, if you've ever driven 5 miles per hour, you know it's pretty hard to maintain that speed exactly and not go a little bit faster than that as you're driving. So there is a great deal of, we think we're being a little bit liberal with that estimate. In addition, we do have lighted elements that we're attaching to Santa's, to the fire truck that Santa's going to be on as well, around the outside to make that thing nice and lit just for the end of the last route as well.
And then I have a question about the lunch hour. How long is the lunch hour?
So we have, I believe we estimated it at half an hour. However, the lunch itself is actually going to be provided. We did have a sponsor come through who's going to provide us with food. So we have staff going out to actually pick that up and have it ready for, of course, council members and then our own board members once they arrive at the aquatic center. So you shouldn't even have to go anywhere. You just show up, we'll hand you lunch, and we can kind of keep the ball rolling.
Okay, so that'll be all ready to go, so we won't have to wait for it to be delivered or anything of that nature then.
That's correct, sir.
That's all I have at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Santangelo.
Thank you. Thanks, Connor. I really appreciate you guys being creative. My question is more towards the spectators. I'm looking this way because I have the map up. Will it be expected that people that don't live on the streets that the parade will be on will be able to come out to those streets, or how does that work?
Of course. So obviously there is still an element of uncertainty with respect to this event because we haven't done it before. However, I'm very glad you brought this up because there was something that I had missed in the earlier part of the presentation. When we created these routes, we knew that we weren't going to be able to hit literally every street in Camarillo. In fact, we had originally tried and realized that unless you wanted to commit, each one of you wanted to commit to an 8 to 10 hour day on your own, that just probably wasn't going to happen. So with that in mind, what we did instead was we tried to make the route conducive to some of the more park-oriented areas in each vicinity. So, for example, we do have the route going right by the community center. We also have it starting, obviously, at Mel Vinson Park. And if you'll notice from the routes, we actually do snake through neighborhoods and streets in such a way that we do get to just about every park or school in the area, that there is a place for people to come out if they aren't able to actually see Santa go right by their house.
Great, thank you. That helps a lot. I get concerned about, people able to still distance, and
Sure.
So that provides more area. Thank you. That was my only question.
All right, do we have any other questions from council members? Mrs. Craven.
Yeah. How is it determined which of us goes on which route?
I wouldn't presume to tell you. From our perspective, it's personally not incredibly important to me which order you'd like to go. If someone has a morning commitment or prefers not to be out Route 5 when it's going to be a little bit chillier than normal, that's all fine to consider. I mean, we're likely to be working this out with your staff and possibly with you personally in the coming weeks, but we tried to keep them relatively similar as far as total length of time commitment, because we wanted to make sure no one was trying to vie for, or no one was stuck with the 3 hour as opposed to the 2 hour time commitment over the course of the night. And I think we've done that.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Sudani? Let's see, Madam Clerk, are you aware of any folks who want to provide a public comment on this? I don't see any.
Yeah, I don't see any either.
Okay, then I don't believe that there is a specific action that we need to take on this, Ms. Nichols, other than to say thank you to Mr. Sudani and thank you to the Recreation and Park District for our
That's right, Mayor. That's right, Mayor. The appropriations are in the current budget. It's within the city manager's authorization, and that was granted by the council as well during the budget process. So nothing further to do tonight.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thanks again, Mr. Sudani, and thanks to the Recreation and Park District. All right. With that, we're going to move ahead to item 3, the consent calendar. Are there any items any council members want to ask about or remove from consent?
Move the approval. Oh,
No, I have a quick, somewhat unrelated issue. This is for the city clerk. I just got notified that someone's having issue. It's either watching the Zoom meeting or logging in to the Zoom meeting as a member of the public. If we could verify or just make sure that that's all working, that with the login credentials to participate.
Well,
is in fact working.
we do have 9 people attending as public members, so it appears to be working. Can you text me?
Yeah,
Whoever-
actually, I sent you an email just a minute ago as well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Milche. Let's see, I think I was going to entertain a motion on the consent calendar.
I made one.
I'll second it.
You did make one, Mrs. Craven, thank you. Motion by Mrs. Craven, second by Mr. Kildee. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Craven,
Yes.
Councilmember Kildee,
Yes.
Councilmember Milche,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Santangelo,
Yes.
Mayor Tremblay.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll now proceed to item 4A, purchasing related policy updates, and I believe we're going to hear from Mr. Uribe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This item is to consider actually 4 different policies. The main one being the city's purchasing policy, and there are 3 others that are related to that update. The city's purchasing policy 4.1 was adopted in March of 1989 and amended in October 2002 and June of 2018. It guides the methods for procuring supplies, equipment, and services for the city. And this update in 2020 is a major rewrite of the format. The existing format is including policy statements and some procedural narratives. So what we wanted to do was remove the procedural narratives and make this strictly a policy document. What we've done with the procedural narrative portions is put those into a separate internal procedures manual that staff can refer to. The suggested policy update has been reviewed with the policy committee, which is a subcommittee, 2 members of City Council, on September 8th and October 5th. And the city's independent auditors review the city's policies related to finance every year as part of their annual audit process. The new procurement policy 4.01 consists of a title change using the word procurement as it better reflects a broader range of functions, which include bidding and contractual services rather than just purchasing. And as I mentioned, the procedural narratives move to a separate internal procedures manual. The credit card usage and surplus property subsections were moved to new separate policies that I'll be touching on in a few slides. And some subsections were added for ethical standards, the procurement manual I referenced, the purchasing thresholds, public works projects, and information technology purchases. Now, one noteworthy change is that we are recommending to change the purchasing authorization thresholds and increase those. As you see in the table below, the current thresholds are any purchases up to $2,500 may be approved by authority of the department director. Anything from $2,500 to $14,999, the city manager may approve. And then anything over $15,000, the city council is the authority for approval. What we're recommending is doubling those thresholds. So now that the department director can approve up to $5,000 and the city manager has the $5,000 to $30,000 threshold, and any purchases over $30,000 would be approved by city council. The credit card usage policy is a new policy. This is the one that replaces the subsection of the procurement policy. And this policy guides credit card usage. It gives some examples of authorized uses and unauthorized uses. And this is the credit card usage by city employees. The surplus property policy is the second new policy that again replaces the subsection of the procurement policy. And this one guides the methods for disposition of city property. Now, as the update to the surplus property policy makes it its own separate policy, that then requires a revision to the capital asset policy by way of reference. The existing capital asset policy references the subsection of the purchasing policy related to surplus property. And now we've made that minor revision, so it now references the new surplus property policy. So that completes the presentation. The suggested actions are to adopt the 4 policies as you see here. So that concludes the presentation, and I will be able to take any questions at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Uribe. Are there questions from council members for Mark? Mr. Kildee, and then followed by Ms. Santangelo.
Yeah, Mark, how did we come up with the $5,000 number? Is that the inflation rate over the years, or how did we land on the $5,000 number?
It was a threshold that city manager felt comfortable with and the policy committee felt comfortable with. And just by way of reference, the cities that we polled nearby ranged from 25,000. I'm looking at the highest threshold, city council authority, our current policy being 15,000 and the proposed being 30,000. Some of the other surrounding cities are 25,000 for that same level, going all the way up to 250,000, with 2 of them in the $75,000 range. So that gives a little perspective to where we land.
And then my last question, changing it from purchasing to procurement, is that just more in line of what we're doing here? We're actually procuring, expenditures here rather than just purchasing. Is that a more encompassing term?
Yes, it includes certain things like bidding and contracting for services that are technically not purchases, but more of procurement aspects.
Thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor.
Thank you. First of all, Mayor Tremblay and Mrs. Craven and Mark and the staff that worked on this, this was a huge overhaul, I can tell. So I appreciate the time and the work that you put into this. One question, well, I have 2 questions. The first one is probably easy. Will the procedure manuals have those flow charts in them?
Yes, that is a perfect example of what was in the policy that is more of a procedure.
As I found them really helpful. Looking at a lot of words can be a little overwhelming when you're trying to figure out. Those flow charts are really helpful to figure out exactly, the steps to take. So I appreciated having those from my understanding. So I would think they'd be helpful for staff as well. My second question is about the local vendors. And I noticed in that the section, let's see, if I look at big page 29, and it's the red line version, that the section on local vendor preference was completely eliminated. And I'm just wondering what was the thought behind that, and why that was decided. And I'll ask the second portion of the question as well, because I noticed that we have a section on contracting with minority and women business enterprises, which I really appreciate. And there's only one very small mention that remains in the new policy about local vendors. So
yes,
I just wanted a better understanding of that.
Okay, yes, good question. So the thought was to include a provision for local vendor preference, but after speaking with city attorney's office, the suggestion was that if we wanted to do that, it was allowable, but they recommended that we do a separate city ordinance stating the benefits of a local vendor type program. So we did not have that ready and prepared. So we were looking into it and may come forward at some future date with that section.
Okay, so the intent isn't to steer away from a local vendor preference. It's just, it needs to be done in a different way.
Correct.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you.
All right, let's see, Mr. Mulchay, you're next.
Two quick questions as well. I was curious, do we know when the last time we updated the purchasing thresholds was?
I do not. I think 1989, when it was adopted, we've been at those thresholds since the adoption.
Okay. Second one, when it comes to credit card usage, those who are issued credit cards and use the credit cards, are they required to turn in at least monthly, if not weekly or something like that, an itemized receipt for each respective charge?
Yes, as purchases are made, the backup supporting documentation is submitted for reconciliation when we get the credit card bill for payment.
But that's a requirement.
Correct.
Okay. Is that something, sorry, as a follow, is that something that would be, that should be outlined in the policy? Only because I didn't see it.
No, that's an example of a procedure
Okay.
that would be followed.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Mrs. Craven, did you have a question?
I don't have questions, but I have comments.
All right, let's hold on to those for just a minute if we might. Let me see whether or not we have any member of the public who wishes to comment on this item. And I don't see any hands raised. Madam Clerk, can you verify that for me?
I don't see any hands raised.
All right, so let's bring it back to council for discussion. And Mrs. Craven, would you like to start, please?
Certainly. I want to congratulate Mark and his staff on this. This revision to our purchasing policy has gone through 3 finance directors, 2 interim finance directors, and you finally got it done, you and your staff. So congratulations. And I'm on the committee, so I may be prejudiced, but I think we did a good job. If there are problems or if there are shortcomings, this is a policy, so it can always be revised. But it was a huge undertaking, and I'm just really happy that it's finished.
Thank you. I guess I would be remiss to not mention that this was a coordinated effort with all departments in City Hall, and everybody contributed to the effort of updating this policy. So I want to thank all of the departments in City Hall for their input.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next? Susan.
I just want to reiterate my thanks. I mean, for members of the public, this is a 25-page policy. So this is this was a lot of work. And for somebody who really hasn't dove into it prior to this meeting, it makes sense. It's as simple as possible. And I think it was really well done. So thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, Mr. Kildee?
Yeah, I too want to thank the staff and the subcommittee for this work. These take hours and hours and days, sometimes weeks and weeks and years to year to come up with a policy in an ever-changing world that we've got. So I commend them for this. I do like the fact that they did change it to procurement. I think that was a very good change. I'm not sure I would have necessarily came up with that, but I commend the staff and the subcommittee for coming up with that. The reason why I asked the number, it is consistent with what we're faced with here, and it's what the city manager and staff is comfortable with, and obviously the subcommittee as well. So I commend them for all this work. A lot of work there. So good job. It's taken a while, but it was definitely worth the wait. Thank you.
Mr. Mulshine?
I'll be quick. Good updates. I appreciate all the work and effort everyone's put into it.
Thank you. And speaking for myself, thank you to Susan and Kevin and Sean for their kudos. The primary kudos on this go to Mark and his staff and all department staff. Charlotte and I, there's no truth to the rumor that either Charlotte or I filibustered in the policy committee on this, and this did not go days, but it does represent a significant amount of work, particularly by staff. So I give them great credit for this work. It's tedious, but I think, Susan, as you said, it all holds together. It makes sense. And I really commend you, Mark, and all the staff for your work on this. All right, with that, do we hear a motion?
I move to adopt an amended policy 4.01 procurement.
Actually, Mrs. Craven, let me ask, can we do, Mr. Pierrick, can we do all 4 items of the suggested action at once, or do you want to take this individually?
You can do them all at once. The only question is whether there's any council member who would, want to vote differently depending upon the item.
Okay, I don't think I'm sensing that. Mrs. Craven, would you be willing to amend your motion?
I will also move to adopt a new policy, credit card usage, as well as a new policy, surplus property, and an amended policy 3.15, capital asset policy.
All
I'll
right,
second the motion.
all right, and we have a second from Mr. Kildee. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Craven,
Yes.
Councilmember Kildee,
Yes.
Councilmember Mulchay,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Santangelo,
Yes.
Mayor Tremblay.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
All right, thank you very much. And again, Mark, thank you for a great job. All right, that's going to bring us, council members, to item 5A, design review, solar and battery standby power assessment study project. And I believe on that, Mr. Grubb will be presenting.
Yes, Andrew Greb will be presenting this. Council and Mayor, just want to mention this item's coming before you based on a request from council for a feasibility study to look at the possibility of incorporating solar and battery standby power into our existing project for standby power at city facilities. So with that, yes, Senior Engineer Andrew Grubb will provide the presentation. He is the project manager.
Great, thank you, Dave. Go ahead and shut my video off here and share the presentation. Great, can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Tremblay and council members. Staff is here tonight to present the results of the solar and battery standby power assessment study for 5 sites. The 5 sites included City Hall, the Courtyard, Police Station, Library, and Wastewater Treatment Plant. So first, some background on the study. Starting in January 2018, Council approved a professional services agreement, or PSA, with JMPE to provide standby power at City Hall and the Corporation Yard using diesel generators. In June of 2019, during the 5-year CIP adoption, Council directed staff to study the feasibility of using batteries for backup power in lieu of diesel generators. Staff returned to Council in July to request authorization to issue a request for qualifications, and Council expanded the study to include studying both solar and battery storage at the 5 sites mentioned. In February, Council awarded the professional services agreement to Clean Coalition to perform the study, and in September, the results of the study were presented to the Utilities Committee. The feasibility study was prepared by the Clean Coalition and TRC. With us today is Frank Wasco, Bob O'Hagan, and Rich Williams from the consultant team to help answer any questions. So the document attached to the agenda report is a summary of the full 61-page study that was provided to Council. The project was first added to the city's capital improvement program to provide emergency standby power using diesel generators at City Hall and the Courtyard. The project was then expanded to study the feasibility of using solar and battery storage as an alternative to diesel generators. Staff reviewed both past outages and looked forward to potential outages when developing the study. According to SoCal Edison, or SCE's, records over the past 5 years, the longest outage was in May of 2016 at the police station that lasted 21 hours due to SCE's equipment failure. The longest outage at the remaining 4 sites was due to the Thomas Fire in December of 2017 and lasted around 4 to 5 hours. Across all 5 sites, there were 53 outages in total, and on average lasted about 1 hour. SCE's record only covered the past 5 years. However, looking forward and planning for the future, staff anticipates much longer outages, potentially lasting up to days or weeks due to natural disasters such as wildfires, floods, or earthquakes, or by SCE's planned increase of public safety power shutoff events. So staff studied the feasibility of the 4 alternatives shown here. The first alternative studied the feasibility of using solar combined with battery storage to sustain an outage. The solar panels would support the building load during the day while charging the batteries so that the batteries could support the building load after the sun sets. The next alternative studied using only batteries in order to provide power during an outage. The batteries would need to remain charged from the grid prior to an outage to support the building load, since this alternative did not include an alternate power source to recharge them during the outage. The next alternative was based on the original design, using only a diesel generator to supply standby backup power. This had the lowest upfront cost of the 4 alternatives and would only supply standby power during an outage. The generators would not provide utility bill savings and rely on on-site fuel storage or the ability to refuel to support a long-term outage. Which brings us to the final alternative, a hybrid system that combines the sustainability of solar and battery resources with the more traditional and lower cost of diesel generators to provide the greatest level of resiliency during an emergency. This alternative would use the solar and battery power to offset the building load during normal usage, resulting in significant utility cost savings over the life of the project. The solar and battery would be used as the primary resource during an outage, and the generator would only turn on as needed to support longer-term outages, reducing the amount of fuel storage needed on site. So the hybrid system was economically sized to cover most outages using the solar and battery resources. Based on SCE records, 98% of outages that occurred in the last 5 years lasted 6 hours or less. The hybrid system was designed so that the generator would only need to be turned on to support those longer-term outages. So here's what that would look like graphically. During normal day-to-day operation, the sun would power the solar panels, which would charge the battery while supplying power to the building. Once the sun sets, the battery would continue to power the building load, offsetting peak demand charges. Finally, once the battery has been depleted, the building would be powered by the grid. So that covers normal operation, and here's what would happen if the power goes down. During a sunny, clear day, the sun would continue to power the solar panels, charging the battery, and supporting the building load during an outage. Once the sun sets, or if it's too cloudy to support the full building load, the battery would kick in to help power the building. Once that battery runs out, the generator would then turn on to power the building load to sustain those longer-term outages. So before I move on to staff's recommendation, are there any questions on how the system would operate?
Any questions from council members at this point? Mr. Kildee.
Yes. Let's just say that we have 30 days of cloudy weather. I know it's highly, highly unlikely, but let's just say that we have a long, protracted time where they're not able to generate enough power through the sun. Would that generator then, if the batteries need to be sustained, will that generator kick in to recharge the batteries in that extremely unusual situation?
That's correct. That generator would be there to supply power as well as charge the batteries if needed.
So obviously there'd be some sort of a regulator on that would let us know if that's the situation or not, or better yet, probably let the system know that that's the situation. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I should mention that's only if during a power outage in your scenario where it's too cloudy. Again, if it's not during a power outage, that building would be supported by the grid.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? Okay, can you proceed to your next segment?
Sure. So based on the results of the feasibility study, These are staff's recommendations at each site using a hybrid alternative. The first column represents a generator. The second column represents using battery only. And the third column represents using solar and a battery. First, at City Hall and the courtyard, staff recommends that the diesel generators installed per the original design to sustain those longer term outages. Next is the library. So staff did not feel that a diesel generator would be needed at this time to sustain long-term operation during an outage. However, if council decides to proceed with the solar and battery storage at this site, the system again could continue to operate during shorter term outages during the day, as described previously. Finally, both the police station and the wastewater treatment plant have existing diesel generators, so staff recommends that these are left in place to continue to sustain long-term outages. Staff also studied the feasibility of using battery alone to sustain the building loads in lieu of a diesel generator. Using battery storage alone does not provide significant utility cost savings since the batteries are still charged from the grid, even if charged during off-peak times. The battery size required to sustain an outage without backup power was not feasible across all 5 sites. Which brings us to the final column, installing solar and battery storage and combining it with the diesel generator in column 1 to create a hybrid system. This was recommended at all sites except the courtyard since there's already solar installed, and the cost to expand the system with additional solar and battery resources exceeded the expected utility cost savings. Staff presented these recommendations to the Utilities Committee in September, and the committee provided staff with feedback and concurred with staff's recommendation. As an interim measure, the committee also recommended completing the design of diesel generators at City Hall in the courtyard. This interim measure would supply these facilities with backup power, while a request for proposals is prepared for installation of solar and battery backup at the recommended sites. So before we move on to the economic data and conceptual site plans, are there any other questions to this point?
Any questions from, yes, Mr. Kildee?
Yes, getting on the courtyard that we already have a solar system in place, is that going to be able to generate enough power? Is it feasible to be able to generate enough power to make that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at the courtyard, that system was installed using a grant and did not provide enough solar panels to support the full load. So we don't anticipate, we would have to expand that system in order to fully operate using solar and likely add a battery, again, to sustain those times when it's too cloudy or during the evening hours.
Thank you.
Other questions? Let me just follow that up. At the corporation yard, I believe it's a solar only setup. There is not a battery, notwithstanding the legend, there is not a battery setup in place at the corporation yard. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So this would be adding that battery component to solar as part of a hybrid alternative, or not?
Again, the cost to add solar, additional solar plus the battery at the courtyard was not found to be feasible since the utility bill is low enough already. You don't gain that additional savings. However, if council felt like that was something they wanted to proceed with to just increase the size of the system to be able to achieve that, we could also do that.
All right, but putting it a different way, then there would not be a battery function added to that site.
That's correct. It would only operate off the generator during the outage.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that clarification. Any other questions? Okay, can you proceed with your next segment?
Okay. So starting with City Hall, this shows the approximate area of solar and battery resources for the hybrid system. The size and locations of the resources shown here are only for comparison and would need to be further refined during final design to make sure the roof could support the additional weight of the solar panels. The estimated cost is 1.2 million, includes the cost to install solar, battery, and a diesel generator. So based on the solar and battery costs, the net present value, or NPV, was a positive 200,000. Net present value is a financial metric that's used to compare the combined savings, if positive, or additional cost, if negative, of the project compared to its capital and maintenance costs over its anticipated useful life. The net present values shown on the following slides are based on a power purchase agreement financing model, or PPA, for a 30-year agreement, and only considered the cost of the solar and battery resources, not the generator, since the generator and its cost does not result in the utility bill savings. So moving to the courtyard, the existing solar panels were installed about 10 years ago, and again were sized to offset just a portion of the building's annual load and are not currently configured to supply power during an outage. This plan shows conceptually what additional solar and battery and diesel generator resources would be required to sustain the building during an outage. Again, the cost of the added solar and battery resources exceeded the utility bill savings over its anticipated useful life, resulting in a negative net present value of 70,000. Therefore, staff did not recommend adding new solar and battery resources at the courtyard. Instead, staff recommends proceeding with the original diesel generator design as a standalone backup power system. This next slide shows the conceptual hybrid plan at the library. The estimated cost is $3.5 million, and the solar and battery components resulted in a positive net present value, or savings, of $450,000 over the term of that agreement. So as described earlier, the solar and battery system could sustain the building load during shorter term outages. Staff did not anticipate a need to sustain the library during those long-term outages and therefore did not recommend installing a diesel generator as part of our recommendations. Next, this slide shows what a hybrid system would look like at the police station. The police station does have a generator, so the cost would just be for installing the solar and battery storage and tying it in with the generator to add an extra layer of resilience to the existing system. The result was an estimated cost of $860,000 and a positive net present value of $135,000. Similarly, at the wastewater treatment plant, this plan shows conceptually what solar and battery resources would be added to the treatment plant to create a more resilient hybrid system. The solar panels were located first on site, and then the remainder was located in the city-owned agricultural field west of the plant. If the project moves into final design, staff would coordinate the effort with the wastewater treatment master plan currently in development to locate as much of the solar as possible on site. The wastewater treatment plant hybrid system is estimated to cost $7.7 million and achieve a positive net present value of $1 million. Sorry, 1 million. So this slide is an overview of the total estimated project costs. The top line here shows the cost of just the diesel generator. You'll notice there's some at the police station and the wastewater treatment plant. There's no additional cost since we recommend keeping those existing diesel generators there. The second line are the construction costs outside of the equipment costs for connection, microgrid controllers, conduit, sound enclosures, as well as replacement costs for aging equipment. And the third line covers the engineering and administration costs to hire consultants to install the equipment. Under a PPA or power purchase agreement, some of these costs will be included in the full 30-year term. Now getting to the solar and battery costs. Here we size the system to provide the most economical solar and battery system for the most reduction in utility cost and offsetting the peak power usage by directing that power through the battery instead of from the grid. And at the bottom here, we show the conclusion with with each site's current annual utility bill. And again, the net present value is representing what the savings would be over a 30-year term. So during this study, we analyzed the feasibility using two ownership models, a city-owned and a power purchase agreement or third-party ownership model. The main difference between these two is basically who pays, owns, and maintains the system, and therefore benefits from any power that's sold back into the grid. In a city-owned option, the city would be required to pay the upfront capital costs as well as future maintenance or replacement costs. The advantage to this is that the city would receive any compensation directly for power that is sold back into the grid. If the city applies for a grant, such as the FEMA grant described in the agenda report, the grant would require that the city pay for, own, and operate the system under a city-owned model. In a PPA ownership model, a third party would pay for the design, installation, maintenance, and operating costs, and the city would in turn pay that third party for the energy use at a set rate over the term of the agreement. The advantage to a PPA or power purchase agreement is that the third party takes on that financial risk of increasing energy costs and all future maintenance, leaving the city with a more predictable and lower cost energy rate and a fully operational backup power system. With the PPA, the third party would benefit from any grants or tax incentives and may pass on those savings in the PPA rate. One example is the investment tax credit that is only available to private tax-paying entities. The study concluded that a PPA ownership model would result in more savings over the term than a city ownership model. Another financing alternative that was researched was a partnership with the Clean Power Alliance under a PPA. The Clean Power Alliance is in the process of investigating ways to provide for reliable, clean backup power in an essential facility within each of its members' jurisdictions. The program is still in its early development. However, CPA may consider a phased implementation beginning as soon as 2022. So just to reiterate the benefits here of the hybrid system, the combination of the solar battery storage and the diesel generator will provide multiple benefits that can only be achieved through the hybrid approach. First, it achieves the city's original goal, supplying critical emergency standby power to sustain long-term outages. At a minimum, the facilities could remain operational for 5 days without refueling the diesel generators. Next, the system is sized to offset each facility's annual building load, achieving zero net energy and providing significant utility cost savings to the city. Another benefit is sustainability. The solar panels will harness the sun's energy, turning it into a renewable energy resource to meet the city's power needs. Excess power generated during the day that would otherwise be sent back into the grid is stored in the battery and used in the evening to offset those peak power demand charges. This will provide additional utility cost savings to the city throughout the year. And finally, the hybrid system adds an extra level of reliability and resiliency to the city facilities. During an emergency, the hybrid system combines the proven reliability of diesel generators with the resiliency of solar and battery storage. If refueling options are limited during an emergency, the city would still be able to operate during the day using solar and battery resources. So next steps, should the council approve the suggested actions, staff would return to council for authorization for the Clean Coalition to complete design of the hybrid alternative. Concurrently, staff would pursue available grant funding for the project, and staff is requesting direction on whether to complete the design of the diesel generators at City Hall and the Courtyard as an interim measure as recommended by the Utilities Committee. So this concludes staff's presentations, and we're available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Grubb. Do members of the council have questions for Mr. Grubb at this point? Mr. Mulchay, let's start with you.
Thank you very much. Just a few. In regards to the diesel generators, what size would those diesel generators be? How many gallons would they hold?
So the original design had about 1,000-gallon diesel generator tank. And again, that could be reduced. We'd optimize that in order to sustain that 5 days. With the solar and battery, we could sustain that during the day. So unlike the diesel generator only scenario where we need enough fuel for that 5 days, we would actually be able to offset some of that on-site fuel storage. So we'd only store enough as needed, as expected for that 5-day scenario.
Of the approximate 1,000 gallons, is that encapsulated within the generator itself, or is that detached? And if it's detached, is it above ground or below ground? What would be the likely?
So most generators now would come with a tank that sits below the diesel generator. So above ground on a building, a concrete pad, and that has double containment for safety. So to prevent any leakage or anything like that. So
Okay.
that would all be enclosed in the sound enclosure.
I'm going to jump around at a few little things, so I apologize. For the PPA, I'm looking at the city-owned versus the PPA model in regards to the hybrid scenario. You had mentioned that if we pursued a PPA agreement, that the duration would be 30 years, and that for some point in that duration, we'd have some sort of locked-in rates. Actually, I see here, we start, proposed starting rates under a PPA model. How long of a lock-in would those rates likely, or how long would they be likely locked in for?
Yeah, it's a good question. So that would vary on the power purchase agreement. As I understand, some of those are locked in for the full 30 years, and they would build in more of an approximation than a rate that might be fixed to some percentage increase over the duration of the 30 years. So it could be either one, and it would depend on the PPA.
The kind of the initial conclusion that going with a PPA model would be over the term of the useful life, approximately 30 years, would be more beneficial financially. Did we work into that the assumption that contrasted against the city-owned model, we may receive all or a portion of potential FEMA grant funding, up to 75% of the cost, the capital cost?
So maybe repeat that question again. So the FEMA grant funding would be for the city-owned model.
No, correct. No, yeah. So in looking at the PPA model versus the city-owned model, okay. Under each of those scenarios, we obviously have a whole lot of different financial projections. Under the PPA model, I'm going to assume, and tell me if I'm wrong, that we're assuming that these rates will be locked in for 30 years, these initial rates that we have here. And under the city-owned model, that we are or are not awarded FEMA grant funding for up to 75% of the capital costs.
So when we did this feasibility study, we based it on the city financing that 100% of the cost.
Okay.
The FEMA grant, if awarded, would be better than the PPA rate, because now that grant would pay for up to 75% of the grant. The city would pay the 25%, and on top of that, also receive the savings generated over that 30-year time frame. So.
And so that would also be true for when it comes to the NPV, net present value projection on these different hybrid scenario for all these different facilities. None of that factors in any assumption of grant awarding. Is that right? So if there is, what I'm getting at is, if there is a grant award, then that number only becomes significantly more positive by however much that grant offsets the capital.
Yes, that's correct. The only grant incentive that we did build into that rate it's called the Self-Generation Incentive Program. And that's a basic rate that's available to anyone installing solar. So the owner would receive it. So under the city-owned model, we did build in, I think it's the $350 per kilowatt, depending on the size of your system. but that was built in to that rate. And as well as the PPA rate, we assumed that that third party would receive the self-generation incentive program, as well as the incentive tax credit that's available. Currently this year it's 26%, and it's projected to go down to 22% and then 10% in 2022. So those were built into that feasibility study. But outside of that, such as the FEMA grant, those were not considered. So that would be an addition.
And to be a point of clarification is that generation figure is only incurred in the event that our solar generation, once it's filled the battery and it's satisfied all energy use needs of that respective facility at that time, then anything left over in which is those solar panels are generating is then sold into, essentially put back into the grid.
That's
Is that
correct.
right? Okay.
That's correct.
That was my initial questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mulchay. Who would like to go next? Mrs. Craven.
Yes, I have four. One is a comment coming from the committee, and I made this comment in the committee, and I wanted to pass it along to the council. With the hybrid versus battery only, because we originally were just going to look at battery only. I'm on a statewide committee where there's an Orange County Sanitation District representative, and they did go with battery only, storage only. And they were very disappointed during some long-term power outages. Some of them planned power outages, some of them emergency power outages, that the treatment plants take a lot of energy to operate, and their storage did not last anywhere near the length of the time of the outage. So that's something in favor of having the battery backup, which Orange County San is now going to do. So that was my comment, but I had a question that I asked during the committee meeting, and I'm going to ask it here. This building that I'm in, City Hall, was built in 1976 to different standards. We've had quite a few earthquakes that have generated much more stringent construction standards and things like that. And nobody knows if our roof would hold those solar panels. So my question is, would there be a difference in cost if all of the panels were installed on carports or whatever you call it, covered parking?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there would be a slight increase to the cost because now we would have to build that structure and that frame. So that would slightly decrease that positive net present value. But something we would look at during final design to make sure if the roof can support it, that would be the ideal option. It's a lower cost. But again, we would look at that. We'd look at the earthquake loads and make sure that structure could handle the additional weight.
And then I have a question about the cost. Somehow I've gathered from this discussion that they would give us a cost if under the PPA model, where the third party would own it, they would give us a cost and we'd be locked into that for the future, or would they give us a cost that would rise periodically with time or be tied to an inflation rate or something like that? I wasn't clear on all that.
So as I understand there, we could go with either a fixed rate over that 30 years, which would build in more of a buffer to account for that inflation, or we could enter into a PPA that would increase over time, like you said, to adjust for that inflation and be tied to an inflation rate. So it depends on the power purchase agreement and the terms in that, but we could do either.
But if we were going to have the same rate all along, it would be much higher at the beginning. Is that?
Correct. It would be higher at first, and eventually as the energy prices increase, we would see that savings.
Okay. I have a couple of other comments, Your Honor. Do you want me to finish or just leave it with my questions?
Why don't you finish with your questions and then I'm sorry, Mrs. Craven. Why don't you finish up with your questions and we'll come back to comments later.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, you're done. Okay. Thank you. Madam Vice Mayor.
Okay, I want to understand the NPV. The NPV values that were given in this presentation were based on using the PPA model, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so if we were to go through and look at this again based on a city-owned model, the FEMA grant, how difficult is it to get that? Is that, I mean, do you depend on that? Can you depend on getting that, or?
Well, our recommendation first is to proceed with final design. We would prepare a request for proposals that would be issued to a contractor. And so during that final design phase, at the same time, concurrently, we'd be applying for this FEMA grant. We should find out the results of the FEMA grant by next summer. And at that time, if we're successful, again, that net present value would look more favorable under the city-owned model, because right now it's slightly negative if we use the city-owned model, the net present value, but that would turn positive because, again, the grant is funding that capital cost, 75% of that capital cost.
And the reason I'm asking is because if it were to change the NPV, would it make it feasible then to say add more solar and battery to the courtyard? See where I'm getting at? It's like if it makes the NPV positive by going with a city-owned model, then would it change what we wanted to do?
Yeah, I agree. And we did plan on applying for the grant for the courtyard as well. And we'll be returning to council in November to request the match, because there is that 25% match. And at that time, we'll have better cost estimates and again, match numbers to return to council with. But that was the plan, was to include that city hall, the courtyard in the 5 sites.
Right. So we're not really locked into one or the other at this point.
That's correct. All we're requesting tonight is some direction from council on the alternatives.
Great. Okay, those were my questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Mr. Kildee.
Thank you. I might be getting ahead of myself, but if we could talk a little bit about that PPA, and if in fact we do go down that road, we're not, obviously don't know what we're going to do, but if we decide to do that, and let's just say that that firm is not making the amount of profit that they had hoped that they could use. I'm assuming that it works out for them because there may be some tax credits that they can get. And obviously the city, pays for the energy use. But let's just say that it's not generating the revenue that they thought it would. Would that also mean that if that invariably does happen, would that system go back to the city itself? Or is that a question that's somewhat premature and needs to be worked on at a future date?
I think some of that will be answered at a future date, but to answer your question, the financial risk for under a PPA is now on that third party. So that's part of the advantage and why we recommended going with that PPA. Again, if we don't get the grant, because that third party would be on the hook for not generating as much revenue.
Okay, so if that's the case, I mean, in other words, somebody's going to be operational. Somebody's going to be operating the system either way. Is that correct? I'm just thinking if there is an unlikely event of a default here.
That's a great question. I think something we'd want to look into and make sure that when we put out this RFP, we're only taking on a third party that's been vetted and has that experience and the reputation again to award that to them. But you're right, we wouldn't want to go with someone who may default in the future.
Thank you.
All right, other questions from council members at this point? Mr. Grubb, I just had a couple quick ones. Actually, Mr. Mulchay asked one I was going to ask, and Ms. Santangelo asked one about the corporation yard, which I thought was a good question I was going to ask. But just to clarify, you're not, under the suggested actions, you're not asking, staff is not asking council tonight for a decision on a city ownership model versus PPA, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Just to make sure. All right. Let me turn and see whether or not at this point we have any public comment. And I'm looking at my screen and I do not see any hands raised for public comment. Madam Clerk, can you confirm that for me?
That's correct.
All right. Then we'll come back to council and we'll come back for comments. And I think I better start with Mrs. Craven because I cut her off earlier. I know she had some comments.
Yes. I hope we don't, I know that we know about the FEMA one. I've been reading and I believe there are some other grants specifically for wastewater treatment plants that for this type of backup that are not through FEMA. And I hope I will try to get those to staff, and since that's the only one mentioned. And I hope we investigate others. I'm also hoping that this doesn't have to be a one all or nothing thing. We might be able to get a grant separately for the wastewater treatment plant, which would make others a smaller grant. It might be more work, but if we can get different grants through different sources, I don't know why we'd have to do everything all together. I do know the county got all of the money for their, or the majority of the money for their covered parking lot from a grant. And I thought that Jeff told me that it was all of it when they got it and recommended we go after that. But that's been a couple of years ago. So I think we need to look at the various funding sources. And I, for one, certainly am not ready to commit to either the PPO or the whatever it's called, the PPA, or the or city owned at this time. I just out of the way I think tend to go with city owned, but because you never know about a company. A lot of very good companies go under, as we've seen during bad times, as we've seen recently. And if we, you know, we need to know how that would work out, or think about how that would work out. But I can certainly support the recommendations for tonight. I can support moving forward with the diesel generators at the 2 locations while we are preparing the RFP, and I'm hoping we'll move ahead on this. And I thank Mr. Mulchay for bringing the battery back up to us, even though we expanded it and we're going with solar and battery in a hybrid thing. But if he had never brought it up, we wouldn't be looking at the hybrid situation, which I think is a much better way to go.
Who would like to go next? I think I see Mr. Mulchay.
Thank you very much. And just the last comment Charlotte made, I will add, I'll say I'll take 50% and I'll give the other 50% to Mayor Tremblay, because he's the one who brought up, the adding of the solar array in order to kind of complete the circle and suggest the broader microgrid concept. So I think that was a very great compliment to the initial idea I had about battery backup. I will say, to understanding that we're not looking nor making a decision on city-owned versus PPA, but I do want to make the observation, the comment that obviously going with one model or the other is largely dependent upon how we can offset a lot of those capital costs, whether they're grants through a multitude of different funding sources. That'll certainly make a significant impact as to which is better. Personally, I've a little bit like Mrs. Craven, I tend to skew more towards the city-owned, particularly for the same concerns that Mr. Kildee had and Mrs. Craven had mentioned as well. 30 years is a long time. This is a very quickly evolving industry market. With it, there's growth and there's consolidation. Growth and consolidation, things move, and we may have an agreement, but that, as Mayor Tremblay probably knows as an attorney, agreements are sometimes only good as the individual or the company you initially make it with. But if that agreement is then sold off, transferred, and the like, unless you have really stringent language that helps mitigate the risks that come with that potential, sometimes you can get caught in someone else's, business, someone else's problem. I think that we would likely, we're clearly eligible for a multitude of different grants, foremost being this FEMA one. But I certainly would like to, I certainly commend staff and the consultant as well. I like this hybrid. I do support moving forward with the diesel generators at City Hall and the Corporation Yard. Overall, I think this is a really good start towards what I think will ultimately be a pretty good project. Not just for the environment, but also for us financially. And I always like to say, it's got to pencil out. Ultimately, it's got to pencil out. It's got to be able to save us money. I'm pretty confident that ultimately we will come to the conclusion that it will save us a considerable amount of money. It's just a matter of how much. But I'm certainly supportive of everything that is on the suggested actions.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next? Susan.
Thank you. So, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Mulchay, thank you. I think whenever you can do three things at once, contribute to sustainable energy, ensure that we have the backup power that we need, and save some money, then it's a win. So I really appreciate all the time that the staff has put into this. Has been kind of the staff spent a lot of time with us at the utility committee, but then meeting with us so that we understood all of the details here. But I support this. I support going forward with the hybrid. Yeah, I would love it if we could do this city-owned, if we could get those grants. So also support going forward with exploring those and seeing what we can get on that end of it. So just thank you and support this project.
Ready to go, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Kildee.
Yeah, I want to commend Mayor Tremblay and Councilmember Mulchay for their tutelage and staff and other council members, subcommittee members too. I've learned a lot reading the report. I want to make a comment that I thought the report was not necessarily easy for me to read, but it was very comprehensive and thorough, and it was laid out very well. And I for one really appreciate that. I do think obviously The financing is going to be very important. Obviously, the grants, hopefully we'll be able to receive some grants, but it's amazing how the technology is really at galloping stages there on this project. Not that the technology has been around for a while, but it's nice to be able to at least have an opportunity, hopefully, to implement this. If no other reason, I think good for the environment, I think is something that we always had to keep in the back of our mind. And I have high hopes that we'll be able to finance this project. So I am in support as well.
And
You're muted.
thank you. There we go. I had to unmute myself. I want to say thank you to my colleagues, and thank you to Mr. Mulchay, and thank you to Mrs. Craven and Ms. Santangelo on the Utilities Committee. I think this is one of those examples where, from a council standpoint, it's a real team effort from a governance standpoint. So I express my thanks to everybody on council for championing this, and to Mr. Grubb and to staff and to our consultants. I echo what Mr. Kildee said. I'm really focused on the sustainability and resiliency aspects of this. I'm hopeful. I do want to reiterate one thing that Mrs. Craven talked about, and that is for the potential for some funding from some other sources. And Susan, I remember, we both have served now on the Clean Power Alliance board, and I know that the Clean Power Alliance as a JPA is still kind of in its formative years, but I know that there was ultimately going to be money set aside for local projects. And I'm hoping that maybe we can pursue an additional discussion with Clean Power Alliance. I think we'd be happy to be a beta test if they'd be willing to provide some grant monies for us. And by that, I mean a local demonstration project. I am, like Mr. Mulchay and Mrs. Craven, I have to say, and I think Mrs. Santangelo as well, I'm more inclined toward the local ownership concept than the PPA side, but we're not being asked that tonight. It's not on our plate to decide tonight, and we'll have to kind of see where this goes. It's a decision that we'll make in the future. I am in support of all three of the suggested actions in the staff report. So that concludes my comments on this, and I think at this point it would be appropriate to have a motion.
I'll move that we adopt all three suggested motions.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion by Mrs. Craven as to all three of the suggested actions, and a second by Mr. Mulchay. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Craven,
Yes.
Councilmember Mulchay,
Yes.
Councilmember Kildee,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Santangelo,
Yes.
Mayor Tremblay.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk, and thank you again to Mr. Grubb for a really excellent presentation, and thank you to staff. Members of the council, at 6:33, I'm thinking that we might try to tackle one more item, if you're up for it, before we take a dinner recess. Is there any objection to that? All right, hearing none, why don't we go to item 6A, which is the 2021-2029 housing element update, initial draft goals, policies, and programs. And I think Mr. Vaca, or
Yes.
actually Mr. Moe is here as well as Ms. Tam.
Correct. Yes. Thank you very much, Mayor Tremblay. Mr. Moe will be providing the overview presentation this evening, and then we do have Oksana Buck joining us and Veronica Tam to help answer any questions that may come up. Thank you.
Oh, I apologize, I was muted. So thank you, Mayor Tremblay and members of the City Council. The housing element is one of the required elements of our general plan, and the state requires jurisdictions to periodically update their housing elements to address their housing needs of the community. Our current state certified fifth cycle housing element expires on October 15th, 2021. and the city's sixth cycle housing element is due to the state prior to that expiration date. Staff is currently working with Rincon Consultants and Veronica Tam and Associates on the sixth cycle housing element update. And so far, we have held one public workshop in August and a city council meeting in October to introduce the draft planned inventory and the process for updating the housing element. Tonight, we'll be reviewing the initial draft goals, policies, and programs, receiving city council feedback prior to releasing them to the public for public input at a workshop anticipated this winter. These draft goals, policies, and programs will be presented again to the city council after the workshop for additional review and comment. So here are our draft goals that we are recommending. Goal 1 is to protect the quality that have created a desirable living environment in the city. Goal 2 is encourage availability of a variety of housing types, designs, and tenures at the price to meet the needs of present and future residents. And goal 3 is to ensure the quality of the residential development is adequate to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of all city residents and to promote housing opportunities for all households. So these 3 goals are very similar, actually identical, except for the red text that in goal 3 that's in the current 5th cycle housing element, and we're recommending that they still apply to our needs, and they'll be placed in the 6th cycle housing element. The draft policies, we have 3 general policies. The first one is preserve the high quality of the city's existing housing stock and residential environment. Policy 2 is to meet the city's local housing needs, commiserate with its fair share of the regional needs, including housing that is affordable to all income groups, the maximum feasible extent. And policy 3 is to promote accessibility to housing opportunities by all households, regardless of the categories on the slide here and other arbitrary factors. So staff has analyzed these 3 policies, and they still apply to the community, and we're recommending they move forward into the next housing element. The current programs in our 5th cycle housing element that we are recommending that we carry forward. Program 1 is a density bonus and other incentives for affordable housing. Under this program, staff would encourage developers of new residential development to include affordable units in exchange for receiving a density bonus or more units, or other development incentives, such as maybe a reduced setback. While we do this, staff will ensure that there's minimal difference between the affordable and the market rate units, or in other words, no one would be able to pick out the affordable units in the development. We'd also ensure that there's adequate separation of the affordable units, so they'd be evenly spread out throughout the development instead of all clustered together in one area. And lastly, the affordable units would need to be included in all housing types in the development. For example, there wouldn't all just be 1 bedroom. They'd be spread out between the 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms if the development has that. And this is really directly linked to City Council Policy 7.9, inclusionary housing. And what we do is we memorialize all this in what we call an affordable housing agreement, and we record it against the property. So program 2 is affordable housing bonus points under our residential development control system. Under this program, the city provides steady residential growth by allotting up to 400 dwelling units per year. And this program also provides an opportunity for market rate projects to receive additional bonus points if their project includes affordable units. And then to really sweeten the deal, the city says that the low and very low income affordable units are exempt from needing an allotment. So we've used this in the past to provide additional bonus points to developers to make them more competitive when they're competing for other projects for that fixed number of 400 units per year. Unfortunately, effective January of 2020 and through January of 2025, SB 330 prohibits the city from implementing any kind of development control for residential development. However, staff recommends we still include this program in our 6th cycle housing element because the SB 330 sunsets January 2025, So the residential development control may continue to apply during the second half of the housing element planning period for the years 2025 and 2029. Program 3 is our accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. In this program, we continue to allow ADUs in accordance with state law, and we provide information to the public, letting them know what the development requirements are and what the process is for obtaining approval. Program 4 is fair housing practices. Under this program, we'll continue to contract with the Housing Rights Center to investigate discrimination complaints and fair housing violations, provide referral and counseling services to Camarillo residents, conduct fair housing public workshops, and provide staff with annual training on housing rights. Program 5 is the nonprofit housing organizations. Under this program, we will collaborate with nonprofit organizations such as Area Housing Authority, Many Mansions, Habitat for Humanity, House Farm Workers, and Cabrillo Economic Development to pursue the development and preservation of affordable housing. Also, staff will support the nonprofits in completing funding applications and serve as liaison with state and federal funding agencies. So a couple of examples of projects that would apply to this program would be the Berry Street project, the 2 units that the city partnered with Habitat for Humanity to construct, and our Stock Lumber project, where the city is partnering with the Area Housing Authority and Many Mansions. Program 6 is our code compliance program. And under this program, we are really just trying to maintain the high quality of our housing stock. Program 7, Affordable Housing Preservation Program. Under this program, we'll preserve the at-risk owner-occupied affordable units from converting to market rate by implementing City Council Policy 712, the Affordable Housing Preservation Program. And what we do is we actually purchase the at-risk units as they become available as normally in the market. And then we resell the units with updated affordable housing covenants and including extending the term to 55 years, and it would reset with each resale of property. So it could be in perpetuity. Oops. Program 8 is House Choice Voucher Payment Standards, or the Section 8 program. And in this program, we state that we'll support the Area Housing Authority to petition for increases in payment standards to HUD to reflect our local market conditions. This is a high cost area to live, and we would support them in that effort. And then we also state that we'll promote their program by providing links off our website to the Area Housing Authority website, which we're actually working on right now because we're going to be opening up the list for Section 8 again in early November. So Program 9 is inclusionary housing programs. And in this, we reviewed each residential development to ensure compliance with the guidelines of inclusionary of affordable housing units consistent with City Council Policy 7.09. And again, this is to minimize the difference between the affordable units and the market rate units, so no one can walk through the development, pick them out, and disperse the units throughout the development so not clustered, and then provide a variety of unit types. Program 10 is our adequate sites. And under this program, we ensure adequate capacity of residentially zoned areas in the housing element site inventory to meet the city's RHNA numbers for the next housing cycle for all income categories. Program 11 is design flexibility. And in this program, we'll utilize the residential plan development, or RPD process, to provide flexibility from development standards as an incentive to encourage the development of housing for lower income households. And we also say that we'll periodically review the Camarillo Municipal Code requirements to ensure the design standards do not impede affordable housing development. And if you're wondering what periodically is, we actually do that with every single affordable housing project that we review. Program 12 is our housing rehabilitation assistance. Under this program, we continue to use CDBG funds to fund the city owner-occupied rehab program and Habitat for Humanity's home repair program. So the new programs that we are currently implementing now that we recommend be in the next house element so we can get credit for them Program 13 states that we'll seek grant funding to support affordable housing activities. So we'll continue to search out and seek out new grant opportunities to further our affordable housing activities. Under Program 14, which is the First Time Homebuyer Down Payment Assistance Loan Program. Under this program, we'll be providing down payment assistance to households that are selected to purchase the affordable units that were acquired through the city's Affordable Housing Preservation Program, which is linked to City Council Policy 7.13. And then also, the city applied for the state's Permanent Local Housing Allocations Grant Program. Now, this grant program is available to the city on an annual basis, and we just need to keep applying for it. And we'll use these funds to fund a down payment assistance program citywide for low and moderate income households. And we're excited about this program for two reasons. First, this program defines moderate income households going up to 150% of area median income, which for a family of four would mean that we could help a family of four that makes approximately $146,000 or less buy a home. The second thing we're really excited about for this program is just this week, we received notification that we were approved, and we are to be waiting for a funding agreement to be sent to us for review. Program 15 is our housing policies. And what we are saying here is that we'll review our 5 city council housing policies periodically to make sure that they're still consistent for affordable housing and community needs, and we'll update them as necessary. So the new program that we need to include here is the state mandated program. And it's Program 16, which requires zoning ordinance amendments. To complete, we need to complete 3 zoning ordinance amendments during our next housing element. And the first one is a low barrier navigation center, which is a service-enriched shelter focused on moving people into permanent housing. And we need to permit this center by right where multifamily and mixed uses are permitted. The emergency and transitional housing requires cities to allow for a shelter or shelters to accommodate our homeless point-in-time count, and it limits our ability to require parking solely on the number of staff that are working at the facility, and instead of basing parking off of the number of beds. And then lastly, the housing for persons with disabilities would require that the supportive housing would be permitted by right in zones where multifamily and mixed uses are permitted. So after tonight's hearing, staff will incorporate any initial feedback from the City Council. We'll introduce the initial draft goals, policies, and programs at a public workshop for input, which we anticipate in winter of 2021. And then we'll provide the City Council and Planning Commission with input received at the public workshop and provide an additional opportunity to review and further comment on the draft goals, policies, and programs. So with that, the staff's suggested action is to review the initial draft goals, policies, and programs for inclusion in the draft 2021-29 housing element update and provide initial feedback.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moe. Do members of the council have any questions for Mr. Moe? Mr. Kildee.
Yeah, David, going back to a previous slide, the growth control initiative, I believe, is not in place, I believe, up until 2025. And when that does sunset, will that be reissued? Would it be re-implemented, or will that be a potential future council decision?
So the SB 330 is set to sunset, but we don't know if it will or if the state would extend that.
That's correct. The requirement that we must put that on pause is from the state of California, and it's set to sunset or end on January 1st of 2025. And we're hopeful that at that point in time, we will be able to use our development control ordinance once again.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'll unmute here. Any other questions from council members? Mr. Moe, you're not the only one. I've done it too, twice tonight. I will say, just in following Mr. Kildee's comment, I mean, it's not atypical for the legislature to go ahead and eliminate a sunset date and extend out the date. But that said, so we could get to 2025 and still have it extended, still have provisions of SB 330 extended. However, that doesn't preclude us from going ahead and as I understand it, and putting it in our policies for the next several years.
Correct.
We can move forward to that, right, Mr. Vaca?
Yes, Mayor, thank you.
Okay. All right, let's see. Hearing no questions from council members, let me see if there are any members of the public who wish to speak on this item, and I do not see any hands raised. Madam Clerk, can you confirm that for me?
That's correct.
All right, so no hands have been raised. Let's bring it back to council then for comments and action, and I'm going to start with Mrs. Craven.
Yes. Many of these things are things that are near and dear to my heart and that I worked hard on for years before I got on the council. And I want to start by saying that I've said this before. I think it was 2013, but I think Mr. Kildee is the only one who was here to hear me say it. And he probably doesn't remember what I said that many years ago. So I'm going to say it again. I think that Jean Scott is probably up in heaven tonight looking down with a big smile on her face and a gleam in her eye. Back in 1983, she and I came down to the city council and asked that they adopt a policy to make sure that the low and very low income housing was spread throughout the city so that we didn't have everything in one big area. People at the time were complaining about it. An Article 34 referendum had failed the year before. And we were trying in our own way to get it passed the following year. So the council said they would, but it took, 13 years or something it took till 2006, I think it says, to get that into our policies. But now that it's in the policies, thanks to Randy Richardson a few years ago, it was put into the general plan, and it's listed there a couple of times, and I'm very happy to see that it's actually stated that that is one of the things. It's not stated in terms that are searchable, but that's another discussion for another meeting. But it's in policy 7.09 section B, and it's also in our stated a couple of times in our programs. I think that is wonderful. It doesn't impact any one neighborhood. It means that we have a lot of housing for families with low, very low, and moderate incomes. And people don't even know that housing is there. If you told people how many of these housing units were in Camarillo, they'd laugh at you. But we have managed, and staff has managed to keep them up. And through code enforcement and through other ways. And I think that it's really great. I've been working on a committee with contract cities to address some low income and very low income needs in statewide is what they're hoping to do. They're hoping to do it in a wacky way, but that's their goal. And when I told them how we address some of the things they're trying to do, they couldn't understand it. So I had our planning director send our policies, our programs out to them so they could understand them. And in one committee meeting, they mentioned they didn't understand how we could do all of this in Camarillo. So I'm proud of our city. I'm proud of the planning department. And I certainly support all of the programs, not just the ones I meant, the goals and the draft goals and the draft policies.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Craven. Who would like to be heard next? Vice Mayor Santangelo.
I think this is really well done, and I too am proud of the policies and what we do for providing or to help provide affordable housing. I just to piggyback off what Mrs. Craven said, I actually think that what's even more important is the effect on the people who actually live in these affordable homes, that they aren't, that their choices aren't that they can only live in one neighborhood, or that they are welcome in our entire community and everywhere in our community. I think that's really more important than what the community thinks. Because I think there's a stigma about what affordable housing is, and that stigma is wrong. Affordable housing is good for our community, it's good for our families. So I think this is well done, and I support it and look forward to see public input on it.
Who would like to go next? Mr. Kildee?
Yes, I agree what's been said, and the fact that the affordable housing has been spread across the city, I think has really done the city a great justice here. Also, I look forward to the process. The thoroughness of this report was outstanding. I look forward to the community input. I look forward to the state certainly approving this like they did our last one here. I commend the staff for their bringing this forward in a timely manner. And I'm in favor of this process and look forward to a speedy success rate up in the state, which we've been able to do in the past. And I expect the same thing. My hope is that the same thing will happen at this particular time as well.
Mr. Mulchay?
I'll just add that I agree that this is pretty comprehensive. It's well done. I appreciate the thoroughness and the time and the effort and the thought that's been put into it. So I echo pretty much all the comments that have already been made.
And I'll just chime in that I agree with Mr. Mulchay. I'm looking forward to the public workshop process. I would like to hear comments from the public, and I'm looking forward to moving forward with this, and the compliments to staff on the thoroughness of the draft and the presentation. Mr. Vaca, Mr. Moe, I don't believe that you are looking for a specific form of motion from us on this, correct?
That is correct, yes. Just if there was any initial feedback, which I believe we've received from the council, and we appreciate the comments that went along with the feedback. And we are excited about this process. We think that it's going to be a helpful tool in trying to further the provision of affordable housing for all segments of the populations in our community. And I'm very proud to work for the city of Camarillo, that they're so respectful in addressing affordable housing needs. And I really appreciate the council's direction and input. So I think we have what we need tonight.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vaca. With that, then we'll go ahead and conclude this item. We have one additional item on the 5 o'clock calendar, item 7A, the VCCF agreement. But with apologies to Ms. Bechtel and Mr. Winkler, we're going to go ahead and take a brief dinner recess before we return at 7:30. But on the 7:30 calendar, after public comments, then we will go ahead and listen to item 7A. So unless I'm hearing any objection from any council members, we will go ahead and take our recess at this point. All right, we'll go ahead then. The record will reflect that we're going into recess until 7:30 p.m. Thank you. All right, members of the council, I now have 7:30 p.m. So we are going to come back into session and begin with our 7:30 p.m. calendar. The first item up are public comments on non-agenda items. And it is time for public comments. And if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. I see one hand raised. Let me just indicate that, would you please ensure that all background noise is muted? And please start by saying your name. The timer on the screen will count down your 3 minutes. The timer starts with a green box indicating you have 3 minutes. When the time hits 1 minute remaining, the box changes to yellow. When the 3 minutes have elapsed, the box will turn red. At that time, your microphone will be muted and we will move on to the next speaker. All right. With that, I'm going to recognize Mr. Matthew Lorimer.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I have a few comments. One of the things I want to talk about is the recall regarding Sean and Susan. I have to say that's really inappropriate. And let me tell you why I think that's inappropriate. We're in the middle of a pandemic, okay? The city's budget strained along with different things. You know, there is nothing done as far as sexual harassment, stealing city funds, none of this. All this has to do is with they didn't like the vote. And the person behind this is Mike Morgan. If you don't know Mike Morgan, he oversaw the Fiesta and the last two presidents who basically embezzled money. On top of that, Mr. Morgan was caught in 2016 pretending to be a code inspecting officer, removing signs and telling people that he was from the city on the code inspection. And on top of that, he paid a gas station owner $50. Now, if you disagree with people in office, you do it at election time when that time is up. But to spend $200,000 to remove somebody because you want to get back in office, Mr. Morgan, shame on you. And shame on people that would waste taxpayers' dollars in a pandemic like that. Okay, I think it's totally unacceptable. The next thing I'd like to talk about is Mr. Kevin Kildee. You know, Mr. Kevin Kildee, you've been in office 24 years. You know, you insulted Caltrans many weeks ago and you said it should take them 10 years to clean up an on-ramp. Well, let me remind you, for years, comments have been made about Caltrans. You know, part of the problem was the storm drains weren't cleaned by the city. Instead, there's been this campaign to pick on Caltrans. Well, you know something? You got to build relationships and you got to work with people, and that's part of the process. And I think you owe Caltrans an apology, Mr. Kildee. You know, that's not the kind of person we need in office. And the third thing I want to talk to you about is the Camarillo Springs project. That should have never came up to be put on a vote. It should have been rescinded, but it shouldn't have never come up. The idea that the city attorney said, hey, you can't vote for it. You can't vote for it. So why put it on the ballot? You know, it's like the Canal Creek project. It was put on so people could define themselves during election season. I think it's totally wrong. I think it's unacceptable, and I don't think it should have come up. You know, we can do better. You know, again, there's a lot of things going on, but the most important thing in this time in our future is family, and that's the priority. And all these other things are just distracting from the business that's most important. The people are the city, and they need people to do their job. And I really think we should focus back on the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm looking to see right now whether are there any other public comments? I don't see any other raised hands. Madam Clerk, do you see any other raised hands?
No other raised hands.
All right, then we will now finish with that item 9 on public comment on non-agenda items. We're going to move back to item 7A, which is the Ventura County Community Foundation Agreement Amendment. And I believe we have Mr. Winkler and Ms. Bechtel here this evening.
Good evening, council members and mayor. I will now share my screen. Okay, so tonight we will be following up on our September 23rd council item regarding the Business Recovery Grant Program. Since that presentation, the Ventura County Board of Supervisors and Ventura County Community Foundation, or VCCF, have come to an agreement regarding transparency and will be moving forward with the distribution of $5,000 grants to all eligible businesses in Ventura County that applied for the COVID-19 Business Recovery Grant. City councils provided guidance on September 23rd, which described how to proceed if the item holding up the county's grant program was resolved. And since that item was resolved, city staff has worked with VCCF to bring you tonight an amendment to agreement number 2020-61. This amendment, if approved by council, will provide a grant to all eligible businesses in Camarillo from the $1 million committed by City Council for the Business Recovery Grant Program. We've identified a maximum of 420 Camarillo brick and mortar businesses who may be eligible to receive this grant. Based on that information, the grant from Camarillo will be in the amount of $2,380. City Council has reaffirmed the need for transparency, and to that end, the process outlined in the amendment will include an opt-out period for businesses. Businesses who opt out or do not have all the required paperwork turned in will be deemed ineligible for Camarillo's Business Recovery Grant. By November 20th, the VCCF will provide the city with project information, which includes the eligible business names, addresses, and owner names. So here's the timeline for that process. Starting tomorrow, if approved by council, VCCF will begin the opt-out campaign. On November 12th, that will conclude the opt-out period. And by November 20th, a week later, the VCCF will provide the city with the project information, which includes the eligible business names, addresses, and business owner names. By December 15th, checks will be distributed to the businesses. And by December 31st, the Ventura County Community Foundation will return the unused funds resulting from ineligibility of businesses or opt-out. And that will include a reconciliation report. On June 15th of 2021, the VCCF will return all remaining funds from voided and or expired checks to the city. The amendment to the agreement requested by the VCCF ensures that they can share the information with both the city and the county, as the application for the Camarillo program was integrated as part of the county's application. The amendment also includes the discussed opt-out period and extension of the timeline. Additionally, the amendment increases compensation for the program administration from $0 to $30,000. VCCF had requested some changes to the amendment after our submission to council, so we included those changes in the red folder to council. The original agenda report contained a date that needed updating. Additionally, there was a typo in the document, which we clarified, and that word is not, that you can see there. So by December 15, 2020, VCCF will issue a check to each of the eligible businesses that did not opt out of the grant program. The original amendment was revised further to clarify section 9.1 discussing project documents to ensure we receive the business name, address, and owner name, and the two dates were updated as noted in the slide. Because of those changes, we provided council with a suggested action item, which we have here. I'd like to thank the council for your time tonight in consideration of this amendment, which aids in business recovery. And I'd also like to thank Vanessa Bechtel and her staff at the VCCF for all of their hard work. Vanessa is here with us tonight, and we are both available for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winkler, and also thanks to Ms. Bechtel, because I know you've had to wait for our 7:30 calendar. Are there any questions from council members for either Mr. Winkler or Ms. Bechtel. Okay, I saw Mr. Kildee first, followed by Mr. Mulchay, followed by Ms. Santangelo, if I got my order right. So, Mr. Kildee, could you start us off, please?
Sure. Mr. Winkler, is that December 15th date, is that a firm date? In other words, can they perhaps procure those checks before that date, or is that date firm?
It says by the 15th. We would love it if it happened sooner, but we're expecting that to happen the week of December 14th, and that's a Monday. December 15th is the Tuesday there, so we hope that's the drop dead deadline on that.
Okay, I see. I have one other question. The June 15th date, that's about what, 6 months from now? Why the 6 month? I'm curious as to that.
So for June 15th, that's for voided checks. So on December 15th of 2020, that's when the VCCF will distribute the checks to the businesses, and that's the date that the check will be signed. And so within 6 months of that period, let's say a business owner for some reason did not cash that check, or the funds just never got spent. That is the point in time when that check becomes void and invalid. And if there are remaining funds there, then they'll return those to us.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Mulchay, followed by Vice Mayor Santangelo, who's on deck. Mr. Mulchay.
Mr. Winkler, I know we've discussed this at several different points over the last few months. When it comes to the number of eligible businesses, and I asked a similar question the last time we discussed this, originally it was a little over 400, and then the last meeting it jumped to like 477, and now it's back down to 420 eligible businesses since the last time we discussed this, which was at 477, I think. How come the number of eligible businesses has decreased?
Vanessa, would you like to answer this question?
I'd be happy to. And I just want to say thank you to George Winkler. I will tell you he has been amazing, and I know has been working so closely with our team as we try to verify all eligible businesses. A few things in answer to your question, Council Member, that we need to keep in mind. Number one, unfortunately, a few businesses have closed or are no longer comfortable accepting the funds because they may not stay in business. A few others actually marked that they were in Camarillo, but upon further investigation, they were actually not in Camarillo. Unfortunately, that happened quite a few times. And it was difficult for us to determine that without actually doing that research with George Winkler, because we didn't have access to, obviously, the city's system. So that was really helpful. And then a number of businesses, when we went through the re-audit process, and we've really actually audited these businesses multiple times now, they didn't have either a current business license or may have not actually complied with the other terms as affiliated with the contract. And so that's the difference. Unfortunately, one of the things that I've come to really appreciate is how hard it is when you're working with businesses between 25,000 and 2 million in gross revenue. The dynamics that they're facing on a daily basis makes it really hard.
That was my only question. Thank you.
No, absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor.
Hi. My question is about the fee, the administrative fee now. And I'm trying to get my head around how we went from 0 to 30,000. And if the 30,000 is this a change only because now of the opt-out program or option, or would this change have been requested even regardless of that?
I'm happy to take that. I don't think any of us anticipated the incredible amount of work that actually has been required to help qualify these businesses. To put it into context, just today, I personally met with about 50 businesses trying to still help them qualify. When we originally started this back in May, leading into June, the expectation was that we were going to get completed applications and that we would be able to help just administer and distribute checks in a rapid basis. We're now over 5 months down the road, and obviously VCCF has spent a considerable amount of resources trying to exercise this program. If you can imagine, we have a very small team, but relative to the size of this type of program, and we've almost spent a half a year of full-time effort trying to help get this type of support to the business community. And so when Mr. Winkler and I learned that the city was open to considering some type of compensation, that would be very helpful. It's been a labor of love, obviously, to help these businesses, but an incredibly expensive one.
So really, this is just the entire endeavor, regardless of this opt-out option. The entire endeavor has been a lot more than we probably all thought it was going to be.
Yes, I would say we've probably spent over 7 figures on this work. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Vanessa.
All right, thank you. Other questions from council members? All right, it's time for public comments. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand. There's a 3-minute time limit, and I see one person with his hand raised. It's Bryce Dearden. Mr. Dearden.
Hello. I just had one quick thing I was going to ask if you could clarify. Towards the beginning, you mentioned that you were recommended with a way to proceed if a hold was cleared, and I was wondering if you could clarify what the hold was that prevented this from moving forward earlier.
Sure. When we originally designed the grant program at the city level, we wanted to make sure it was very equitable, and the county's grant program was a lot smaller at the time. They had dedicated a lot less funding to the program. So only a certain amount of businesses in Camarillo were going to get the grant. And what council decided was to be equitable and to increase that distribution, we would fund businesses that did not get funded through the county grant program. And as you heard, there was a lot of extra need from staff at VCCF to implement this project. And at the same time, the county increased funding to approve funding to fund all eligible businesses in the county. That includes Camarillo. So we brought this to council with the the idea of, well, okay, so now that our amendment, our agreement that we created that said we were going to fund the unfunded businesses, now that they're all funded, what do we do with this funds? And so we met with council, and they had some ideas. And one of the ideas was still to perhaps give extra funding on top of the county funding. So as the holdup that you asked about happened, that was an agreement that had to do with transparency of business owner name and information. So the county, requested that information, and the VCCF was operating under a certain parameters of providing the businesses with privacy. So there was a bit of a disconnection there, and they've got that resolved, and here we are today.
Okay, great, thank you. That was my primary question. The other question I was going to ask, is the $30,000 in compensation going to be drawn from that pool of aid to be sent out, or where is that coming from?
Mr. Winkler, can you respond to that one?
Absolutely. So that would be an extra general fund commitment. As you can see, yes, that would be an extra general fund commitment.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering if you'd clarify that. How does this work? Do I waive my time? Or?
You have an additional 2 minutes and 20 seconds, Mr. Dearden, if you wish to avail yourself of it.
I don't, yes, I would like to. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other members of the public who wish to comment? I don't see any on my screen. Madam Clerk, do you see any on yours? Well, I don't believe Madam Clerk would see any either. So we're going to stop with public comment at this point, bring it back to council for action. Who would like to start? Mrs. Craven.
Well, I have a comment. I'd like to thank George for sticking with this. I'd like to thank the foundation for sticking with it, even though it was costing them a tremendous amount of money with no guarantee that they would get anything. And I'm sure the $30,000 doesn't pay them for all the work they've done on this. Helping people fill out forms when we said, you know, you have your form in, and if it isn't complete, you don't qualify. But they stayed with these people and helped them fill out the forms because they knew they were small businesses having a lot of other, I'm laughing at the cat that went by on the screen. They had all kinds of other things on their mind, and applying for a $5,000 or a $2,300 grant was not the very top priority for a businessman or a businesswoman. So I thank you very much, both of you, for sticking with this. I thank Mrs. Nichols and Mr. Ramirez for the time and the encouragement they put in. And before that, I'm just really proud of the way this has all turned out, and I'm thankful that it's finally coming to fruition.
You'd like to go next, Ms. Santangelo.
I echo what Mrs. Craven said. Vanessa, what you're doing to help these businesses qualify is really extraordinary. And it really, it helps us do what this was intended to do, to really truly help our businesses. And I'm so grateful that the city has been in the position that we are in to be able to do this. And I thank you and George and everybody else who worked so hard to make this happen. And I hope it's before December 15th, but businesses out there, the funds are coming, and thank you.
Mr. Mulchay.
I'll just quickly add, Vanessa, thank you. George, thank you. Staff, thank you. I appreciate all the effort and the time that's gone into this. For the 420 businesses that are that will likely, or that are eligible and likely to receive the support, keep in mind it's not just the $2,380 we're giving, but that's on top of the $5,000 coming from the county. So provided each of those 420 businesses won it, they got $7,380 coming to them. And I know for some people that might not seem like a lot of money, or for a small business owner, and those who are the most vulnerable in this kind of climate, that's the difference of whether or not you can pay your employees, whether you can pay your utility bill, whether you can pay your rent, whether you can keep the lights on. And for a lot of these people, it's their livelihood. And I'm more proud than ever with this program, what we're doing. And we are, to echo the Vice Mayor's words, we're very privileged to be in a position to be able to help in the way we have. I don't know of any other city who's contributing to the degree in which we have, and that we're willing. We're very fortunate to be in this position. It's a time, it's an opportunity to give back and support our businesses when they're in the most need of that support. So I've always supported this, and I continue to support it. But thank you very much.
Mr. Khalid.
Yeah, I also want to echo the comments that were made by Mr. Mulchay. And thanks staff and Mr. Winkler and Ms. Bickel for all their yeoman's task and all this. And it was interesting, a labor of love, and sometimes labors of love are some of the most important things that we can do, and especially for the small business. Many of them have been really hit hard with this, and we have to remind ourselves too that they don't always have the staffing levels to know how to fill out these type of forms too. So it falls usually on an extremely small staff. So I appreciate you sticking with them. And $7,000 is a lot of money for a lot of businesses here, and it's going to be greatly appreciated here. So I'm hoping that the checks can, obviously, as we all can be, cut at a reasonable amount of time here. But it took a while to get this together, but it was definitely worth the wait. So I totally support this, and thank you again.
I'll just simply echo all the sentiments of my four colleagues and say thank you, and I'm very proud of this program. So, with that said, succinctly, for a change for me, do we have a motion on the suggested action?
I'll move the suggested action. Do you want? Shall I read it?
No, that's all right, Madam. No,
Second.
we're fine, Madam Vice Mayor. So we have a motion by Vice Mayor Santangelo and a second by Councilmember Craven. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Craven,
Yes.
Councilmember Kildee,
Yes.
Councilmember Molche,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Santangelo,
Yes.
Mayor Tremblay.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Bechtel and Mr. Winkler.
Thank you. I feel so moved by all of you. You've been really tremendous. Thank you for what you're doing for Camarillo businesses. I really appreciate it. I'm in awe of your leadership. Thank you again.
Thank you. All right, we are going to go now to item 8, new business oral communications. Do we have anything from the city manager, Mr. Ramirez?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. First and foremost, I have a couple housekeeping items, but I did want to take an opportunity to thank staff along with the council with regards to this evening's agenda. I think we just went through a very aggressive agenda in the sense that we took quite a bit of work to get all these items put together and completed. So I'm pretty proud of staff on all the various things we had on tonight's agenda. So for that, just a couple other quick things. First and foremost, Halloween is coming up around the corner. We just ask that everybody be safe and take into consideration the health guidelines. Small gatherings are known to be a primary spread of COVID-19, and just keep that in mind. One other item is we have introduced for the first time an electronic newsletter. So we are now distributing that electronically via email. We're pretty excited about that for the first time. And lastly, the census is all but wrapped up. We, as a city of Camarillo, did quite well. We were in dead heat with the city of Moorpark for the top city in the county. We fell 0.2 of a point behind them, but I consider that a victory. The county of Ventura ranked 154th in the nation, over 3,200 counties. We're very proud of that as well. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez. Mr. Pierick.
I have no items tonight.
All right, thank you very much. Which member of the council would like to start us off? How about Susan first, followed by Charlotte?
Okay, on October 27th, I attended the investment committee. And October 23rd, I was so excited, I actually got to go out into public. It had been a really long time since I had done an event, but I was at the Fat Burger soft opening, and really good food. Everybody there was really nice. And I enjoyed lunch and a great conversation with Commander Tennyson. And it was very nice. Really interesting this morning on the elected officials call for COVID. I don't know if any of you were on it, but Dr. Levin was talking about the difference between us and another county that is about the same size of us, and the fact that they're in yellow and we're not, and what the difference is between what that county is doing and what we're doing. That county is testing more. And our testing numbers is extraordinary. I mean, we're doing great. But his point was that anybody with any mild symptoms, any at all, should go get tested. Because if we can identify more positive cases that are asymptomatic, that with contact tracing, we can get those numbers down even more. So, you know, there's free testing available. Most of the results are coming back within 24 hours now. So it's really, really easy to get tested. So, so keep wearing your masks, keep washing your hands. And if you have anything that's symptom-like, or you're not feeling well, go get tested. And if anybody's wondering, the testing numbers, it's not by, you know, if I went and got tested and I've been tested, you know, let's just say 5 times in the last 3 months, I'm only counted as one test, as a test. That doesn't count as 5 tests. So anybody worried about what the numbers are, or if that's inflating numbers or changing numbers, the test is test per person. Because if I became positive, that would just be me. I wouldn't be positive 5 times, hopefully. The other thing that I wanted to say, I'm gonna take a few minutes here. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I wanted to say something about that. It was just about 4 years ago that a friend of mine was killed in a domestic violence incident. And, you know, especially now with the pandemic, with the toll that it's taking on a lot of our mental health, with the differences in people not being able to go to work, and not being able to possibly escape abusive situations. I just really wanted to reach out to anybody who's listening or watching, that there is help available. There are people who have been where you have been, and there are people that want to help you. So please reach out. The hotline.org is the National Domestic Violence Online Hotline, or 1-800-799-SAFE, S-A-F-E. If you can't remember that, you can dial 211 and they will get you help. You know, the other reason that I'm bringing this up is because 4 years ago when this happened in this community came together. It came together in ways that blew me away, and I've lived here most of my life. And I remember my son was friends with my friend's son. And so he was involved in what happened indirectly. And I remember him looking at the community response and looking at how people came together. And he was just like, wow, people really care. And he noticed it. And I remember telling him, this is what I love about Camarillo, and this is what I love about this community. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter how much money you make, doesn't matter if you even knew these people. It didn't matter if you were Republican or Democrat or independent. It just mattered that this was a part of our community. And what mattered is that we had these goals. We wanted to come together to mourn the loss. We wanted to come together to support this family. And we did. And that's what makes this community so great. And so as we're heading into a very tension-filled time, and I've spoken about this before, you know, the election is coming up. Who knows what's going to happen? But I know that people are fearful, people are angry, people are passionate, people are acting out in ways, whether it be actual behavior or online behavior. And I'm asking us all to remember what community is and to care about each other and to think about what we all have in common rather than what makes us different, and pay it forward. It's okay to disagree with the issues, but that doesn't mean that somebody is less than you or worth less. There's never a place for violence or threat of violence. There's never a place for bullying or harassing because of our political differences. This is our home. We are neighbors, and we need to take care of each other. We don't have to agree on everything, but we need to care about each other. So I'm just asking everybody to really dig deep and take care of each other. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. Who would like to go next? Mrs. Craven, followed by.
I think you went mute.
I did. I'm so sorry. I thought I was unmuted. I recognized you, Mrs. Craven, followed by Mr. Mulchay. I apologize to everybody.
Okay. I wasn't going to bring it up, but I will comment on Susan's last comment. I do remember that year. It was a very tragic year in Camarillo. It wasn't just that situation for spousal abuse. There were two others. Both of the others turned out to be murder-suicides. And Camarillo's murder rate zoomed by 500% that year. We got severely criticized as a council for allowing it to happen. The thing about spousal abuse is it's the type of thing that you don't see coming. Friends of those people all said, gee, I had no idea. So I reinforce what she said. If you can't remember anything else, if you are in trouble, if you've had spousal abuse, if you're in any way fearful, call 211. That's a local number. They will get you help. So on to what I was going to say is I attended a meeting of the California Contract Cities Legislative Committee today. We reviewed the legislative platform. Their legislative platform, I'm happy to say, is very sane, is very stable. It's not like their other proposal that they're looking at. And I believe that it's a very good legislative platform for all of the contract cities in the state. Next, I was wondering, and I don't know if anybody can answer it, but what's the criteria? What does it look like for when we might be able to, all of us, meet in city council chambers again?
I think that may be a question for Mr. Ramirez. We're going to punt to him.
Yeah, again, a great question. We are coordinating with the other cities, and as of right now, we are targeting January, the cities throughout the county as the first time we would go back in. The one exception to that would be the reorganization, to the extent we could control the amount of people in the chambers. But staff is currently developing a plan that would allow staff to actually participate in the meeting from their offices, reducing the number of people within the chambers itself. We've also put a plexiglass for on the dais, as well as we're looking at the staff table as well on that. But we are, I think the cities are all consistent. So they're looking at January as that kind of time frame in which we would get back in.
Thank you. I'd asked that because I knew the Pleasant Valley Recreation and Park District is meeting here. So I was just wondering when we would. So January's fine. Next, at budget time, and I'm bringing this up because it was at budget time and then a time later when we looked at the budget again. I think it was in July. I really had no idea that this COVID thing and all of the requirements would continue this late into the year. So I think, as I said, I'm bringing this up because I'm the one who pushed to continue with the employee recognition dinner, and it's becoming very apparent to me that we will not be able to hold that. So I don't know what it will take. Maybe staff needs to bring it back to us right away to make that change, but I think the employees need to be made aware. I just don't see how we could possibly comply with all of the restrictions, even if we got into the orange tier. We'd still have the opportunity to, shall I say, backslide into red before December. So I throwing that out as my comment on that. Next is the Oh, the official ballot box out in front of City Hall. I've had to come in here several times to pick up packets and to do various things. And every time I come, there's always at least one person there dropping off their ballot. And I am, today when I drove up, there were 4 people standing in line, socially distanced, all with masks, but they were all dropping off their ballots. So all I can say is, in my opinion, there is no excuse for anybody to not vote. There's still time. If you put it in the mail, it will get there. And remember, it doesn't have to get there on election day. If they get it the next day or the day after, that's okay. Vote. If you have to fill in your ballot tonight, drop it in tomorrow's mail, bring it down to City Hall, however you want to do it. And the one at City Hall is an official ballot box. Your vote there will be counted. So I don't want to hear anybody saying later, oh, I just didn't know how to vote. There's a lot of ways to vote this year. And finally, there was an article in the October 22nd Wall Street Journal, and I understand that municipalities are different than corporations. However, this one kind of really hit me. In July, I think it was, or maybe it was at budget time in June or study session sometime, Mr. Uribe reaffirmed that we did have our AAA rating. And this says, in the US and many other countries, AAA corporate bond ratings are rare and have been awarded to the financially strongest debt issuers with minimal default risk. Microsoft Corporation and Johnson & Johnson are the only 2 American corporations with a coveted grade from S&P. So I think we should, even though we're a municipality, we're still one of the few, and we need to be proud of that, because I believe we are continuing the tradition of handling our money very prudently. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Craven. I think Mr. Mulchay was next.
Thank you. I do want to add, I think it's kind of funny in today's times, whenever we describe a group of individuals, we have to preface that they have masks and that they're socially distant. I always find myself adding that whenever I make an observation about, oh, there's a group of people. Oh, by the way, they are socially distanced. And,
My grandson talks about cars being socially distanced.
I always drag things out, but to add on that, when coronavirus first started and we had to socially distance, people in the Starbucks drive-thru were socially distancing their cars or leaving a car length between, and I couldn't help but start yelling at them. So you don't need to social distance your car. I'll be rather otherwise brief. October 15th, I attended an EDC meeting. October 21st, the quarterly budget meeting. October 27th, the investment committee meeting. For next month, for November, I canceled the Camarillo Airport Authority meeting. Speaking with Kip Turner, the County of Airports didn't have anything of substance to bring to the Airport Authority, but he had informed me that originally they had planned to bring the new hangar lease, which has been very important to a lot of people, particularly the hangar owners out at the airport. And so he says they were going to bring that back December, January, rather soon, but they saw an opportunity to possibly continue to work on amending some of the language to make it more applicable to the hangar owners. So we will see what comes of that, but I'm hopeful. I just want to point a clarification. Fat Burger that opened up is in the Camarillo Premium Outlets in the food court, I think, right? Because I'm gonna definitely go get my burger on sometime next week.
It is. Thank you for
mentioning
that.
Aside from that, that's all I got. Oh, I'm sorry. Vote. Yes, please vote. And like Charlotte said, like Susan alluded to, you don't have any excuse to vote. Honestly, it's I voted several weeks ago, and it took my wife and I a few minutes to complete. And you know, if you don't know something, do your research. Please, by all means, do your research. But you don't have any excuse not to vote. It's so easy. It's so easy. And yeah, like Charlotte said, you can drop it in the mail, or you can drop it in the safe little deposit box out front here in front of City Hall that's collected daily. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Kildee?
Yes, I'll start off ditto what's been said about domestic violence, and ditto also what's been said about voting. I attended a VRSD meeting on October 15th via Zoom, and I also attended the October 21st quarterly budget meeting. And that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Okay. I have, just in terms of meetings attended, on October 16, I had a Metrolink Board of Directors orientation meeting. On October 21st, we all had our special meeting for quarterly budget purposes. On October 23, I had a Metrolink Board of Directors meeting, and earlier today, a Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Authority meeting. I had 4 specific things that I wanted to bring up tonight. First of all, I do want to echo, these aren't the 4, but in terms of what Susan said on domestic violence, and in terms of what others have said on voting, yes, please vote. In terms of domestic violence, please go get help. There are resources available for you. On the 4 items that I want to talk about, the first was on a traffic safety item. And on October 12, Mr. Kildee and I had a Streets and Transportation Committee meeting where one of the items that was discussed was the possibility of having flashing yellow left arrows for permitted left turns at traffic signal controlled intersections. And the committee said, gee, this sounds like a good idea. Let's bring it to council to take a look at, and perhaps we could beta test 2 or 3 intersections. And in other words, it's adding a flashing yellow light to a permissive green light. And Mr. Klotzel can certainly articulate this better than I can. But I've received input on multiple occasions from the business owner on Carmen and Las Posas on the incidents of traffic collisions at that intersection where cars are going west on Las Posas and they're turning left or south on Carmen. And you have, there was another accident there just last week. So I would encourage staff to review that particular intersection for consideration in a beta test. If we do that, and we're all going to be hearing about that anyway before we went to that type of beta testing mode. And they have them in Thousand Oaks. If you've had them, if you've driven in Thousand Oaks recently, you've seen them in operation, and I do like them. The second thing is particularly with regard to restaurants, and both a current pandemic as well as a post-pandemic comment. During the pandemic, you know, we have a lot of restaurants that have chosen to operate outdoors, which is wonderful. We also have recognized in past meetings that we have winter months coming. We had Santa Ana's earlier this week. Some of the tents got damaged. We know we have inclement weather on the way, but we still continue to have restaurants with outdoor dining, and it is a critical component for them from a business viability standpoint. And hopefully our county continues to ascend the tiers, the colored tiers. I'm going to go back in a few minutes to what Susan talked about this morning, but I think we need to continue to be flexible and allow those restaurants that are utilizing outdoor dining to keep some outdoor dining, even if, assuming we climb the tiers and we go back to a partial or 100% capacity indoors. Why do I say that? Because we're still going to need to retain the social distancing protocols of at least 6 foot distance between tables, which means from a mass standpoint, they're not going to be able to get back to 100% capacity if you look at it from a numbers standpoint. So in reality, the restaurants aren't going to be able to get to 100% capacity during the pandemic. And I don't think, no one can make it. I think it's very difficult. I'm going to rephrase that. It's been very helpful for many restaurants to have that outdoor dining capability. So we need to continue thinking about our flexibility on that. And then after the pandemic is over, I think we need to continue to look at ways to keep our outdoor dining component permanent when the pandemic is over. And I hope that we would have a chance to discuss that together with community development staff and staff overall when that in the months coming up. I had a question for Mr. Ramirez on the library, and it may be for Mr. Thomas as well. Have we received any new guidance at all from the state relative to library reopenings?
Yeah, Mr. Thomas could probably weigh in as well. I am not aware of any guidance from the state at this point. I think they fall under the same category we do. There is, the county, however, is slowly starting to reopen their libraries. That's also a point of conversation amongst the city manager group as to how to do that. Our curbside pickup is doing exceptionally well. Our biggest concern is the expectation from the public. If we do allow people back into the library, we would not allow any, how would you put it? They'd have to, in essence, get their book and check out and exit the facility as an example. So that's kind of part of the challenge. And right now it's working well, but we are definitely continuing to evaluate that on a day-to-day basis as to when we will open that.
Okay, so it's fair to say that there are conversations occurring among the cities and the county library system on how to effectuate perhaps a partial reopening with social distancing.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so I just want to say I look forward to having that conversation, at some point in the near future. And then finally on COVID-19, thank you, Mr. Ramirez. On COVID-19, I was on the same call that Susan was on this morning, and that other jurisdiction was the city and county of San Francisco, which has just about the same population that we do. Very different, than Ventura County does. I'm sorry, let me clarify that. Not the city of Camarillo. But it was really interesting to hear Dr. Levin speak about and Susan's already really covered this, about the big thing, what they're doing there, and that is that they are testing in very large numbers. And if we could test in larger numbers, we might be able to discover more cases. And although that may be counterintuitive, actually lower our numbers. I want to reiterate what the Vice Mayor said, which was, if you don't feel well, get a test, because the testing capacity is in place now. And just to give you a little bit of context, what Dr. Levin indicated is that we want to get to below 34 new cases. We have 3 separate metrics, but this is one of them in terms of new cases. We have the positivity rate and the health equity metric, et cetera, which are looking relatively good right now. But we want to get below 34 new cases diagnosed per day in order to get from the red to the orange tier. And we have a ways to go, but it is within reach. And I think and I'll leave it with this, the figure that resonated with me is that we have had now 166 deaths, COVID-19 related deaths here in the county. And as Dr. Levin said, the very worst flu season that the county has had, I believe he said in this century, Susan, correct me if I'm wrong, was 49. So you put those numbers in context and realize the seriousness of the pandemic. And all I can do is continue to echo what the Vice Mayor has said. Please continue to wash hands, wear your mask, socially distance, and show that we're taking care of one another, taking care of ourselves and taking care of one another. And again, please vote. And again, on the domestic violence front, help is available. And please, if you believe that you are in need of help, please go seek it. Okay, I think that's it. I believe that's all of the items that are on our agenda for this evening. Thank you very much. And with that, we stand adjourned.